Seamus was a boy whose silence had become a part of his identity. From the moment he came into the world, his family accepted it as something unchangeable, believing that some children were simply born without a voice. His mother especially insisted that he was special, and that his quiet nature made him pure and innocent. The neighbors would often see him sitting by the window watching the world with curious eyes, but never uttering a sound. His life seemed ordinary, yet there was always a strange tension in the house, a sense that something unspoken hung over them like a heavy fog. The home itself stood apart from the rest of the town, an old creaking structure surrounded by tall trees that blocked sunlight from reaching its walls. Visitors rarely came, and when they did, they never stayed long. The air inside felt thick and cold, and there were always locked doors that no one but his mother dared to open. Seamus learned early to obey without question, to sit still, to watch, and to never wander into places he was told to avoid. His mother loved him fiercely, but her affection was strange, often smothering and filled with rules that made little sense to a child. Years passed, and Seamus remained mute. Doctors could find no physical reason for his silence, and some began to whisper that the boy was haunted, that something had stolen his voice when he was still small. Others said he was simply afraid, and whatever that fear was, his mother was the cause. She never let anyone else speak too closely to him, and whenever a visitor asked Seamus anything, she would quickly answer for him, saying he was shy and did not like strangers. Seamus grew used to this pattern until one cold winter evening, when something inside him began to change. He started to hear faint noises in the night, muffled cries, soft thuds, and dragging sounds that seemed to come from beneath the floorboards. At first he thought they were dreams or tricks of the wind, but soon the sounds became more distinct. He saw his mother moving through the house at odd hours, carrying heavy bundles wrapped in sheets and disappearing into rooms that were supposed to be locked. Seamus's mind was filled with confusion and fear, yet he said nothing, for he had never said anything before. His silence was both a prison and a shield. But one night, as he watched his mother dig in the basement, his heart pounded so violently that he felt his chest might burst. She whispered to herself words he could barely understand, and when she turned toward him, her face looked like a stranger's. In that moment, something inside him cracked, and for the first time in his life, a sound escaped his lips. It was rough, uneven, like the voice of someone learning to speak anew. His mother froze, staring at him with eyes wide with disbelief. Seamus trembled, and before he even knew what he was saying, words poured out of him in a broken whisper. He accused her of hiding 7 corpses in the house. The words echoed through the air, shocking even him who had never spoken a word before. His mother's face drained of all color. She tried to silence him, but the truth had already been released. It was as if his voice had been locked away with the bodies all those years, and speaking it out loud had broken the curse. Neighbors heard the commotion and came running. They found Seamus standing in the doorway, shivering with fear, repeating the same phrase over and over: 7 corpses in the house. 7 corpses in the house. The authorities were called, and when they searched, they uncovered what no one had dared to imagine. Beneath the house were shallow graves. 7 in total, each one carefully concealed. The revelation tore through the town, and people could not decide what was more shocking, that a boy who had never spoken had suddenly found his voice, or that his mother had been living among the dead for so long. For Seamus, that night was both a liberation and a burden. He had spoken at last, but his words had destroyed the only world he knew. The silence that once protected him was gone, replaced by questions that no one could answer. How had he known what was hidden? Why had his voice emerged only when the truth needed to be told? The doctors who examined him afterward said it was a psychological release, that the trauma of what he had seen or sensed had finally forced his mind to break free. Others believed something supernatural had happened, that the spirits of the dead had chosen Seamus as their messenger. Whatever the truth, his life was never the same again. He would speak now, but only rarely, his words heavy and careful, as if each one might carry a secret he could not bear. In the years that followed, Seamus became a symbol of innocence and horror, a reminder that silence can sometimes conceal the darkest truths. People who met him felt a strange sadness, as if looking at a child who had seen too much. His eyes always distant, his tone always trembling. Though he could now speak, he never raised his voice beyond a whisper. The house where it all happened was torn down, But the memory of that night lingered in every telling and retelling. The boy who never spoke until he revealed the unspeakable truth had become a legend, a story told in hushed voices whenever people wondered how evil could hide so close to love, and how sometimes the quietest souls carry the loudest secrets. When Seamus finally spoke, the world around him shifted from silence to chaos. His single sentence tore through the fragile calm of his home like a storm. The words he uttered brought with them the weight of death, the kind of truth that reshapes lives and destroys illusions. When he said his mother was hiding 7 corpses in the house, no one could comprehend what a child who had never spoken before could possibly mean. But the tone in his voice, the trembling clarity in his eyes carried a truth no one could deny. His mother stood frozen, her lips parting but no sound escaping. For years she had built her life upon secrecy, upon careful layers of control and deception. Now it all unraveled before her eyes. Seamus had spoken, and his words could not be taken back. The police arrived after neighbors called, terrified by the strange noises and the desperate cries coming from the house. They found Seamus sitting near the fireplace, pale and shaking, while his mother sat across from him, silent, staring into nothingness. She did not resist when they asked questions, nor when they searched the house. Every locked door was forced open, every corner examined, as if the walls themselves might whisper the truth. The smell came first, faint but unmistakable. Then the sight of disturbed earth in the basement floor. 7 shallow graves, each one carefully placed as if part of some ritual, each containing human remains wrapped in cloth and bound in silence. The discovery stunned even the most hardened officers. They looked at Seamus, then at his mother, trying to understand how a mute child could have known about such horrors. The investigation soon turned into a national spectacle. The press called it the Seamus Case, the boy who broke silence to reveal death. Reporters described the old house as cursed. Neighbors recalled strange behavior from his mother, how she often spoke to herself and carried heavy sacks at night, how no one had ever been invited inside for long. Some claimed to have heard strange noises. Others said they saw shadows moving through the windows. But no one dared to ask too many questions until Seamus spoke. The police dug deeper, both literally and figuratively, and with each discovery came another layer of darkness. The corpses were identified as missing persons from nearby towns. Drifters, laborers, and 2 local women all vanished over a span of years. When confronted, Seamus's mother gave conflicting statements, sometimes claiming innocence, sometimes whispering that the bodies were gifts, sometimes saying she had only buried what others had killed. Psychologists called her unstable, perhaps suffering from a form of delusion or guilt that had consumed her over time. But the mystery remained. How could Seamus know about the graves if he had never seen them? Some investigators believed he had heard noises, sensed movements, or even seen glimpses when he was small. Others thought his silence had made him more perceptive, as if the absence of speech had sharpened his awareness. But there were those who believed something else entirely, that the boy was somehow connected to the dead, that they had spoken through him, reaching for justice through his long-held silence. The trial that followed was grim and deeply emotional. Seamus was brought to court, though he rarely spoke except to answer direct questions in his soft, trembling voice. He told them that he had seen his mother digging, that he had heard her whispering names at night, that the house was never quiet even when no one else was awake. His words chilled everyone in the room. They were not dramatic or loud, but filled with the haunting clarity of truth. When asked why he had stayed silent for so long, he said he did not know, that something inside him would not let him speak until that moment, as if his voice had been buried alongside the dead until it was time to bring them back. Experts studied Seamus for months, calling him a phenomenon. His sudden ability to speak after years of muteness fascinated scientists. Some said it was the shock that freed his voice. Others believed it was repression, lifting at last. But none could explain the timing or the knowledge he held. He had never been educated, never read reports or seen evidence. Yet his accusations led investigators directly to where the bodies lay. It was almost as if the house itself had spoken through him. When asked about his mother, he showed confusion and sorrow, saying that he still loved her, but that she had done terrible things he did not understand. Psychologists tried to measure his trauma, but Seamus remained a mystery, his mind holding fragments of horror that surfaced only in dreams. As the case drew to a Close, his mother was found guilty, though her mental state spared her the death penalty. She spent her remaining years in an institution where she seldom spoke. The few who visited said she would ask if Seamus still remembered her, and whether he still talked to the dead. As for Seamus, he was taken in by a distant relative, far from the house that had become a symbol of darkness. He tried to live quietly, attending school, learning to use his newfound voice, but the shadow of that night never left him. Each word he spoke felt like an echo of the first one he ever uttered, the one that destroyed everything. Over the years, the story of Seamus turned into legend, told in small towns and whispered in classrooms. People said the spirits of the seven still followed him, that his voice carried their pain. Though he grew older, he remained withdrawn, always listening, always cautious of the silence around him, because he knew silence could hide more than words ever could. The authorities eventually demolished the house, hoping to bury the past, but the ground itself seemed restless. Those who visited said they felt cold air rising from the earth, as if it remembered what had been hidden there. Seamus never returned. He lived quietly under another name, yet those who met him said his eyes carried a sadness too deep for his age. The Seamus case became more than a story. It became a warning about the power of truth and the cost of silence, how a voice once freed cannot return to quiet, and how sometimes it takes the innocence of a child to reveal the horror that grown hearts try so hard to conceal. After the truth came out, Seamus became the center of a mystery that no one could fully understand. People wanted to see the boy who had never spoken until the night he revealed 7 corpses hidden in his own home. But fame was not something Seamus could bear. His voice, though finally freed, carried the weight of all the things he had said and the countless things he wished he had not. The world wanted answers, but Seamus had none to give. His silence had once been a prison, but now speech became another kind of torment. Each question from strangers, each retelling of his story reopened the wound he carried deep inside, because to speak was to remember, and to remember was to relive the horror his words had unleashed. The investigators, psychologists, and reporters all surrounded him, trying to understand how a boy mute for years could suddenly speak in such detail about the graves they studied. His mind drew charts, ran tests, but found no logical explanation. Some believed his silence had been psychological, a barrier formed by trauma and fear, and when he finally broke it, his subconscious released everything. It knew. Others whispered about supernatural forces, about the souls of the dead, reaching through him, using his voice as their last chance at peace. But Seamus never confirmed or denied these theories. He only said softly that the house had always been speaking to him, that it had never been truly quiet, and that sometimes in the walls or beneath the floor, he could hear what others could not. Life after the revelation became a blur of institutions, courts, and questions. Seamus's mother was gone, taken to a place where the broken and mad were kept. Her face never left his dreams, and in those dreams, she was not the monster others believed her to be, but the woman who had once held him close and told him that silence kept them safe. He struggled to understand how love and evil could live together in the same heart, and why the truth had to destroy everything he knew. When he spoke for the first time, he thought it would free him, but instead it made him a stranger to himself. His voice trembled whenever he used it, and he grew fearful of words, as if they held power beyond his control. The people who took him in tried to give him a normal life, a new school, new friends, and a name unconnected to the horror that had made him famous. But the whispers followed. Wherever he went, children stared, calling him the ghost boy or the cursed child. Teachers treated him with pity or caution, unsure how to speak to a boy whose first words had been an accusation of murder. Seamus withdrew again, speaking only when absolutely necessary. He began writing in notebooks, instead recording thoughts and memories. But even those he often burned, afraid that the truth might escape from the pages just as it had from his mouth. One night long ago, his caretaker said he sometimes woke up screaming, his voice echoing through the halls, crying the same phrase over and over. 7 corpses in the house, as though the memory had taken root inside him, refusing to die. As years passed, Seamus grew older but never escaped the shadow of what he had seen. He tried to understand his mother's mind, piecing together fragments of memories, her secretive behavior, the whispers in the dark, the smell of earth that clung to her clothes. He wondered whether she had acted alone or whether something darker had guided her. Perhaps a madness that had crept through their home long Before he was born, some experts who studied the case claimed that Seamus's silence had been his way of protecting himself from the horrors he unconsciously sensed around him, that his mind had chosen silence over confrontation until the moment. The truth could no longer be buried. Whatever the reason, his voice had emerged only when it was needed to shatter the lie. The public eventually lost interest as news stories replaced his in the headlines. But for Seamus, the story never ended. Every sound reminded him of that night. Every whisper carried echoes of the dead. He found solace only in solitude, wandering quiet places where no one asked questions. He often visited cemeteries not out of fear but because he felt peace among the stones, where names and truths were already spoken. He would sit there for hours listening to the wind, wondering if those who rested beneath the ground felt the same silence that had once surrounded him over time. People forgot his name, but in small towns, the legend lingered: the boy who never spoke until he revealed death, the child whose voice carried a curse. Psychologists continued to reference him in their studies, calling him a rare case of traumatic release. His name appeared in textbooks, though few knew what had become of him. Some said he grew up and moved far away. Others claimed he never left the country and lived under a new identity. Some even believed he had returned to the place where it all began, to live among the ruins of the old house, though no one ever confirmed it. What remained certain was that Seamus had become a symbol of what silence can hide and what truth can destroy. The case changed how people saw children, teaching the world that even the quietest among them might be carrying stories too dark to imagine. In his later years, Seamus spoke rarely, but when he did, his words carried a strange calm. He told those who listened that silence is not emptiness, but a space where truth waits to be heard. He said that sometimes people speak only when the world is ready to listen, and that his voice was not truly his own, but something that belonged to the past. When asked if he forgave his mother, he would only say that love is more frightening than hate, because love makes monsters harder to see in the end. Seamus lived quietly, far from crowds, his life a reflection of the silence he was born into. Though he could speak now, he chose not to, often sitting in quiet rooms, staring into nothingness, remembering the night when words first escaped his lips. For the rest of his days, Seamus remained a reminder of the fragile line between innocence and horror, between silence and revelation. He taught the world that truth, no matter how long buried, finds its way to the surface, and that sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest echo. His life was not one of peace but of purpose, for through his voice the forgotten were finally heard, and through his pain, the world learned that silence is never empty, it is only waiting.